Dylan was 19 years old when this happened to him, and he still thinks about it sometimes when he lies in bed at night, unable to sleep. Dylan loved video games, especially horror games, and he would often stay up late on weekends playing in his small bedroom while his parents were asleep down the hall. He felt like the darkness made the game scarier and more exciting, and the quiet of the house helped him feel alone in the world of the game. One Friday night, Dylan was browsing a small online forum where people shared indie horror games. These were games made by random people, sometimes with creepy stories or strange endings. That night, Dylan found a game he had never seen before, and it caught his attention right away because it had no real title or description. The file was just called Play Me, and the post said nothing else. There was no cover image, no reviews, and no comments. It felt like a hidden game that no one else had discovered, and Dylan's curiosity was stronger than his fear. He downloaded the game without thinking much about it, telling himself it was probably just a short, low-quality horror game. The file was small, and it downloaded quickly. Dylan turned off his room light, closed the curtains, and put on his headphones. The glow of the computer screen lit up his face as he opened the game, and it started without any menu or instructions. It just opened into a first-person view of a dark hallway with dirty white walls and flickering lights on the ceiling. The sound of buzzing lights and distant footsteps played in his headphones, and Dylan felt excited. He liked when games made him feel like he was really there, walking in empty, creepy places. The hallway was narrow, and the screen shook slightly, making it feel like Dylan was really walking down that hallway himself. He moved the character forward, looking at the shadows on the walls, and noticing small details like stains on the floor and old, broken tiles. Every step made a soft, echoing sound, and he could hear his own breathing in the game. Dylan didn't know what the goal of the game was, so he kept moving forward, checking doors to see if they would open. Every door was locked, and the hallway seemed to go on forever. The lights kept flickering, and sometimes the sound of footsteps would stop for a second and then return. It felt like someone else was walking with him, but he couldn't see anyone. After about 10 minutes of playing, Dylan stopped for a second to check if there were any controls or hints. That's when he heard it. A voice in the game, soft and low, whispering in his headphones. The voice said, "Dylan, don't go further." At that moment, Dylan's body froze. He pulled off his headphones and looked around his room, his heart pounding in his chest. He lived in a safe neighborhood, and nothing bad had ever happened in his home, but hearing his name in the game felt wrong. How did the game know his name? He tried to calm himself down, thinking that maybe the game read the name of his computer. User profile, and it was just a scare trick to make the game feel more personal. Dylan took a deep breath, telling himself it was just a game, and put his headphones back on. But as he continued walking down the hallway in the game, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was different now. Before, it felt like he was exploring, but now it felt like he was being watched. The shadows on the walls seemed to move in ways he couldn't explain, and sometimes he thought he saw something dark pass by the corners of the hallway just outside his view. The lights flickered harder, and the buzzing sound grew louder, like static pressing into his ears. Dylan's hand was sweating on the mouse, but he didn't stop playing. He wanted to know what would happen next. He tried to open more doors, hoping to find a room or a clue. But every door was still locked, and the hallway felt like it was stretching longer each time he turned a corner. His excitement from before was gone, replaced with a heavy, uncomfortable feeling in his stomach. At one point, the screen glitched, showing strange red symbols for a second before returning to normal. Dylan paused, leaning back in his chair, his eyes wide, trying to understand what he just saw. He took off his headphones again, listening to the silence of his room, but he could still feel a heavy presence, like the air in his room had changed. It was a quiet night, but Dylan's heart was beating so loudly that it felt like it was the only sound in the room. He put the headphones back on slowly and continued walking in the game, not because he felt brave, but because he felt like he had to. He didn't know why, but something in the game was pulling him forward, and he felt like he couldn't stop now. When he reached a dark part of the hallway, the lights went out completely in the game, and for a few seconds, Dylan could see nothing but darkness on his screen. Then the lights flickered back on, and a message was written on the wall in the game in red letters. "Don't go further." Dylan stared at it, his hands shaking, realizing that the game was talking to him directly. It wasn't just a normal game anymore. It felt alive, and it knew who he was, and it was warning him. But Dylan, breathing heavily in his dark room, didn't listen. He pressed forward, deeper into the game, not knowing that this was just the beginning of the worst nightmare of his life. Dylan kept playing the strange game even after seeing the red message on the wall that told him, "Don't go further." He felt like he was already too deep to stop now, and even though his body was tense and his hands were shaking, he kept pressing the keys, making his character walk deeper into the dark hallway. The lights flickered above him, and every few steps, the buzzing sound of the lights would stop for a moment, making the silence feel heavy in his ears. Then the buzzing would come back, louder than before, and it made Dylan flinch every time it returned. He kept looking over his shoulder in his room, feeling like someone was watching him. But every time he turned, there was no one there, just his dark room and the soft glow of the monitor lighting up his worried face. As Dylan moved further, the game started to change. At first, it was just an empty hallway, but now there were dark stains on the floor, like old water damage or something worse. The walls had scratches, and sometimes he thought he saw handprints, smudged and dark, on the dirty white paint. The footsteps in the game sounded closer, almost like there was someone behind him, matching each step he took, but just half a second late. The sound felt so real in his headphones that Dylan took them off a few times to make sure the sounds were not coming from inside his own room. Each time, the room was quiet, but when he put the headphones back on, the footsteps started again, reminding him that in the game, he was not alone. At one point, Dylan found a mirror on the wall in the game. It was cracked, and the reflection was blurry, but he could see his character standing there, facing the mirror. He moved his mouse to look closer, and for a moment, he thought he saw a shadow in the reflection standing behind his character. It was tall and thin, and its head was tilted to the side like it was studying him. Dylan pulled back from the screen, his heart beating fast, and stared at the reflection in the game, but the shadow was gone. He moved his character back and forth, trying to see if it would appear again, but the reflection now only showed the empty hallway behind him. He took a deep breath, telling himself it was just a game, and maybe it was a programmed jump scare to mess with players. But deep down, Dylan felt that it was something else, something that was watching him through the game. The game sound started to change as well. The buzzing of the lights turned into a low static, and he could hear whispers mixed in with the noise. At first, the whispers were too soft to understand, like wind moving through leaves. But as he walked deeper into the game, the whispers became clearer. He could hear words like "stay" and "behind you," and each time he heard them, Dylan felt a cold shiver run down his back. He ripped off his headphones when the whispers suddenly said his name again, clear and close. Dylan. It was not a shout or a scream. It was a soft whisper, but it felt like it was right next to his ear. He looked around his room, breathing hard, clutching the headphones in his hand, but the room was empty and quiet. Dylan felt scared, but he couldn't stop. He felt like if he stopped playing, something worse would happen. So he put the headphones back on, even though his hands were shaking, and continued down the hallway in the game. The doors in the hallway were still locked, but now they started to shake as he walked past them, like something was on the other side trying to get out. The sound of knocking and scratching came from the doors, and sometimes he heard soft crying or laughter from behind them. Each door he passed made him feel like he was walking deeper into something he should have stayed away from. Then, the game glitched for a moment, and a face flashed on the screen for a split second. Dylan couldn't see it clearly, but he knew it looked wrong. It looked like his own face, but the eyes were all black, empty holes, and the mouth was open too wide as if it was screaming silently. Dylan jumped back, almost falling out of his chair, and the screen returned to the hallway as if nothing had happened. His breathing was heavy, and his eyes were wide, staring at the screen, waiting for something else to happen. But the game was quiet again, except for the soft static and the flickering lights. Dylan whispered to himself, "It's just a game," trying to calm down, but the words didn't help. The game felt too real now, like it was reaching out of the screen and into his room. The air in his room felt heavy, and the shadows seemed darker than before. He could feel something in the room with him, something that was just out of sight. The game character kept moving, and as Dylan turned a corner in the game, he saw a door at the end of the hallway with a small light above it. It was the first door that wasn't locked, and it felt like it was calling to him. Dylan stopped in front of the door in the game, his finger hovering over the mouse, unsure if he should open it. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold air of his room, and clicked to open the door. The screen went black for a moment, and then a message appeared in red letters. "Don't turn around." Dylan stared at the screen, frozen, and felt the cold fear crawl up his spine. The room was silent, the game was silent, and all he could hear was his own breathing as he sat there, wondering what would happen next, not knowing that his nightmare had only just begun. Dylan sat frozen in front of his computer after seeing the message, "Don't turn around," in red letters on the screen. His room felt colder, like a window had been opened, but when he looked around, everything was closed. The screen was black for a few moments, and then the game came back, showing his character in a new area. This time, it was not a hallway. It was a small, dark room with a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling, swinging slowly, making shadows move along the cracked walls. There was a single door in front of his character, and the words "Come back" were scratched into the wood of the door. Dylan's hands were shaking on the mouse, but he couldn't stop himself from playing. He felt like something bad would happen if he turned off the game now. He tried to close the game, pressing the ESC key and clicking to exit, but nothing happened. The game wouldn't close. Instead, each time he pressed ESC, a new word appeared on the door in the game, spelling out "Stay." Dylan's breathing was heavy, and he could hear his heart pounding in his ears. He unplugged his computer, hoping that would shut everything down, and finally, the screen went black. Dylan leaned back in his chair, breathing hard, trying to calm himself down. His room was silent, but he still felt like someone was standing behind him, watching him in the dark. He didn't sleep that night, leaving the lights on in his room, listening to every small creak in the house, jumping at every shadow. The next morning, Dylan decided to turn on his computer to see if the game was gone so he could delete it. The computer turned on like normal, and for a moment he felt relief, thinking maybe it was just a nightmare. But when his desktop appeared, the icon for the game was still there, except the name was different now. It didn't say "Play Me" anymore. Now it was titled "Come Back." Dylan stared at it, feeling fear rise in his chest. He didn't want to open it, but he also didn't want to leave it there on his computer. He decided to open it one last time, planning to find the game files and delete them after it opened. The game opened immediately, without any loading screen or menu, and his character was standing in front of the same door in the dark room. On the wall next to the door, a message was written in what looked like dripping red paint. "Why did you leave me, Dylan?" Seeing his name again made Dylan's whole body freeze. This was not normal. No game should know his name like this, and the way the game was speaking to him felt personal, like it was alive and angry that he tried to leave. He tried to move his character away from the door, but the controls wouldn't work. The only thing he could do was open the door in front of him. Dylan clicked to open the door, and the screen turned black for a moment before showing a new hallway. This hallway was different from the others. It was longer, darker, and filled with doors on both sides, all of them slightly open with darkness behind them. As Dylan moved his character forward, the doors started to shake, and soft whispers came from inside the rooms, calling his name, "Dylan, Dylan." Sometimes the whispers turned into soft crying, and sometimes they turned into laughter that echoed in his headphones, making him pull them off in fear before forcing himself to put them back on. As he walked down the hallway, the lights above him would turn off one by one behind him, forcing him to keep moving forward in the dark. He felt trapped, like the game was forcing him to continue. At one point, his character passed by a mirror hanging on the hallway wall. In the reflection, Dylan saw the dark figure again, standing behind his character. It was tall, thin, with its head tilted and long arms reaching toward the character's shoulders. Dylan screamed, pulling back from the screen, but the figure disappeared in the reflection, and the game kept going as if nothing had happened. Dylan received a notification on his phone while playing. His phone buzzed, and when he picked it up, it was a text from an unknown number that simply said, "We're not done." He dropped his phone in shock, his breathing quick and his eyes wide, staring at the message on the cracked phone screen. He didn't know what to do, but the game was still running, the hallway still stretching in front of him, the whispers growing louder, and the darkness closing in behind him. He felt like he couldn't leave the game now. It was as if the game had connected to his life, pulling him deeper into its dark world, and if he tried to escape, it would follow him. He moved forward, passing door after door, each one shaking harder as he passed, the whispers growing into screams, calling his name again and again. "Dylan, Dylan, Dylan." The lights flickered above him, and shadows moved along the walls, sometimes stopping to look at him before disappearing into the darkness. Dylan's hands were sweating on the keyboard, and his vision was blurry from fear and tears, but he kept moving, unable to stop, feeling like the game was alive, like it needed him to keep playing. Each step felt heavier, and each shadow felt closer. He reached the end of the hallway, where a single large door was waiting for him, with a message scratched into it that said, "Ready?" Dylan hovered his finger over the mouse, his heart pounding, knowing that once he opened that door, nothing would ever be the same again. Dylan sat in front of his computer, staring at the large door on the screen with the word "Ready" scratched into it. His room felt cold, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of his computer fan. His finger hovered over the mouse, and even though his whole body was shaking, he felt like he had no choice but to open the door. It felt like the game was waiting for him, like it was alive and wouldn't let him go until he finished. Dylan took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a second, and clicked to open the door. The screen went black, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence in his headphones. Then a new message appeared in red letters. "Look behind you." Dylan's heart started to race, and his breathing grew faster. He didn't want to look. The room felt wrong, like someone was standing in the corner, watching him, but when he glanced quickly, there was nothing there. The screen stayed black, repeating the words, "Look behind you," over and over, each time glitching and shaking, making a low, static sound that filled his headphones. Dylan whispered to himself, "It's just a game," but the fear in his voice made it sound like he didn't believe it. His hand was shaking on the mouse and sweat dripped down his neck. Finally, the screen turned back on, showing his character in a dark room with a broken mirror on the wall. Dylan moved his character closer to the mirror, and in the reflection, he could see himself, but something was wrong. The reflection was darker, and behind his character, in the mirror, stood the tall, thin figure he had seen before. Its head was tilted, and its arms were long and bony, reaching toward his character. The figure's face was hidden in the dark, but its eyes glowed faintly, and Dylan felt like they were staring right at him, not just his character in the game. Dylan felt frozen, unable to move, watching the screen as the figure in the reflection raised its hand and placed it on his character's shoulder. In that moment, Dylan felt a cold pressure on his own shoulder, as if someone was standing behind him in his room, touching him. He screamed and jumped from his chair, turning around quickly, but there was nothing there, only the darkness of his room and the glow of the computer screen. His breathing was fast and his eyes were wide as he slowly turned back to the screen, seeing the figure in the mirror now standing beside his character, staring into the reflection. On the screen, the figure slowly raised its hand and pointed at Dylan through the mirror, and new red letters appeared. "Now you're part of Room 0. The game glitched, and for a moment, Dylan saw the face of the figure clearly. It was his own face, but twisted, with black, empty eyes and a wide, unnatural smile that stretched too far across the face. The screen flickered again, and the game closed by itself, returning Dylan to his desktop. The icon for the game was gone, like it had never been there, and for a moment, the room was quiet again. Dylan stood there, breathing hard, looking around his room, feeling like something was still watching him. He turned off his computer, hoping that would end everything, and crawled into bed, pulling the blanket over himself even though he was sweating. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dark figure standing in the corner of his room, its head tilted, watching him with those empty, glowing eyes. When he opened his eyes, the room was empty, but he felt its presence like it was hiding just outside his sight. Days passed, but Dylan couldn't forget what happened. He stopped using his computer, too scared to turn it on. He stopped playing games completely, even on his phone, afraid that somehow the game would return. But every night, when he turned off the lights, he saw a shadow in the reflection of his black computer monitor, just for a moment, standing behind him, watching him. Sometimes, when he was half asleep, drifting into dreams, he would hear a soft whisper near his ear saying, "Don't turn around." One night, Dylan woke up to the sound of footsteps in his room. He stayed still, pretending to sleep, listening as the steps moved slowly around his bed, stopping near his head. He felt the same cold pressure on his shoulder as he did when he was playing the game, and he heard a soft, slow breathing near his ear. He closed his eyes tightly, holding his breath, wishing it would go away. Then he heard the whisper again, clearer than before, "Now you're part of room 0." The pressure lifted and the footsteps slowly moved away, fading into the silence of the room. The next morning, Dylan checked his computer and the game was still gone. It was like it had never existed, but Dylan knew it was real. He could feel it, and he could see the dark figure in the corners of his eyes, always standing there, waiting, watching. Dylan's parents noticed he had changed, that he was quiet, tired, and afraid of the dark. But Dylan couldn't tell them what happened because he knew they wouldn't believe him. How could he explain that a game had pulled something dark into his life, something that wouldn't leave? Dylan has never played another game since that day, and every night, when he turns off his lights, he checks the dark screen of his monitor, making sure the reflection is normal. But sometimes, just for a second, he sees it again. The tall, thin figure with the tilted head, standing behind him, waiting for him to look away. And in those moments, Dylan remembers the last message the game showed him. Now you're part of room 0. He knows now that it wasn't just a game. It was a doorway, and once you open it, it never really closes.